I spent over 30 years building an empire. Trusting my wife's love was my greatest reward. But when I secretly overheard a conversation, I realized everything was a perfectly staged performance to take it all. Now the game has started, and I'm about to show them who the real master strategist is. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I drove past my son-in-law Mark Johnson's house. The silver Lexus, a car that should have been in my garage, sat brazenly in his driveway. An icy premonition of trouble gripped my chest, a feeling I'd learned to trust over a lifetime of business deals and high-stakes negotiations. Something was wrong, very wrong. I killed the engine of my Honda and approached the window on trembling legs, my heart thudding in my ears. The curtains were drawn, but a small gap revealed them both clearly. Elaine, my wife of 25 years, sat on the couch, and Mark, my son-in-law, leaned against the bookshelf with a smug expression I'd grown to despise. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. Elaine's voice, a sound I once found charming, now drifted through the half-open window like poison in my veins. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, hitting record, just as Mark continued, his lawyer's voice crisp with satisfaction. The timeline's perfect. File in June, claim irreconcilable differences. With the new Texas statutes, Elaine's entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, plus spousal support for life. He was talking about my life, my legacy, with the cold detachment of a man reviewing case files. Elaine laughed, a sound that now held nothing but contempt. The real treasure isn't in those files. I've been cataloging the visible kingdom, while the crown jewels remained hidden in plain sight. I pressed myself against the brick wall, a cold sweat beating on my forehead despite the warm Houston air. I'd spent my entire career building an oil and gas empire from nothing, while they had been systematically mapping its destruction. 2 years of playing the devoted wife, Elaine said, examining her manicured nails. God, the man actually believes I love him. A twig snapped under my foot, and their heads turned towards the window like startled deer. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Did you hear something? Elaine's voice carried a note of suspicion. Probably just the neighbor's cat, Mark replied, his voice laced with contempt. I stayed hidden until their conversation resumed, my phone capturing every venomous word. When I finally crept back to my car 15 minutes later, my entire world had shifted on its axis. 25 years of marriage, reduced to a legal strategy session between my wife and son-in-law. The front door opened just as I reached for my car keys. Elaine and Mark emerged, their faces a mask of shock when they saw me sitting in my car. Richard, what are you doing here? Elaine's voice climbed an octave. I forced my expression into something resembling normalcy, though my pulse thundered in my ears. Just finished a job site inspection nearby. I lied smoothly, climbing out of the car. Thought I'd stop by and see Olivia. Mark stepped protectively closer to Elaine, his lawyer instincts kicking in. She's not here, Elaine said quickly. I was just helping Mark organize some legal documents for a client. The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, and I wondered how many lies I'd swallowed over the years, without question. I kept my voice light and conversational, playing my part. I asked about her work schedule, mentioned a fake phone call about an appointment, and watched the flicker of panic in her eyes before she recovered. I made sure they saw me with my phone in hand as I left, a subtle hint that I was not as oblivious as they thought. As I drove away, I watched them in my rearview mirror, their heads bent in urgent conversation. They suspected I might have overheard something, but they didn't know about the recording on my phone. 43 minutes of crystal-clear audio that would change everything. They thought they were playing chess with a checkers player. They were about to discover their mistake. The shock of their betrayal had worn off, replaced by something colder and more focused. I'd been a businessman for 35 years. My mind was a machine for identifying problems and constructing solutions. Now the problem was my own family, and the solution required the same methodical approach I'd used to build my empire from a single pickup truck and a borrowed tool set. My home office, a room I'd built myself 15 years ago, now became my war room. The mahogany desk I'd crafted with my own hands was soon covered in yellow legal pads, their columns labeled assets, weaknesses, and leverage points. I put on my reading glasses, the ones Elaine always said made me look distinguished, and let my grief crystallize into strategy. My first call was to Sarah Chen, my accountant for 12 years and a forensic accounting expert. "This is about more than estate planning, isn't it, Richard?" she asked, her voice crisp with professional efficiency. "The domestic variety," I replied, and her silence spoke volumes. She'd handled enough messy situations to know the signs. I instructed her to draft asset protection documents that would completely insulate my business holdings from any personal legal action. "Whoever's planning to take a run at your personal finances won't even see the real money," she assured me, referring to the 3 offshore accounts I'd established years ago for tax optimization. Elaine's amateur reconnaissance had completely missed the real treasure, the crown jewels hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, I began my own investigation into Mark and Elaine. Her credit card statements told a fascinating story. Over 8 months, nearly $50,000 in unauthorized transfers had been funneled to a joint savings account I'd never opened, with Mark's name as the beneficiary. The designer clothing, luxury lunches, and spa treatments weren't just for her pleasure. They were a woman's attempt to prepare for a different life, one funded by my money. The irony was suffocating. She'd complain about grocery costs in the morning and buy a luxury handbag for thousands of dollars that afternoon. Mark's vulnerabilities proved even more illuminating. My contacts in the oil and gas industry were generous with information about the city's most ambitious attorney. The man who planned to steal my fortune was drowning in debt. I discovered he had over $180,000 in student loans and was behind on payments to several contractors. His reputation was also stained by dismissed ethical complaints about client fund mismanagement, dismissed but documented. Mark had champagne tastes on a beer budget, always promising to pay his debts next week before disappearing when the bills came due. As I compiled this evidence, my daughter Olivia called. "Dad, is everything okay between you and Mom lately?" Her tone carried the careful neutrality of a therapist, a professional distance she used with troubled patients. She explained that Mark had been fishing for information about my company's structure, and she found it strange since Mom seemed stressed about money. Olivia's psychology training had detected the predatory behavior they thought they had hidden so well. "Probably just curiosity about how the business world works," I said carefully, playing my part. I couldn't tell her the truth yet. Not until I had all my pieces in place. They thought they were playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules. But they had underestimated the analytical mind that had built my company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. My wife and son-in-law had spent months positioning their pieces on the board, but they were about to discover that their opponent had already moved his king. The real war began not in a courtroom, but in the sterile silence of a bank conference room. I was sitting across from Tom Bradley, president of First National Bank, and my golf partner for 15 years. The room smelled of coffee and leather, a familiar scent where I'd negotiated dozens of deals. I slid a comprehensive security review document across the polished table. "I need all joint access points verified and temporarily frozen pending identity confirmation," I said, my voice calm and steady. Tom's eyebrows rose. "This is going to inconvenience Elaine significantly, Richard." I met his gaze directly. "I'm counting on it." The security holds activated at 11:47 a.m. that day. I knew the exact time, the exact moment the life she had taken for granted would vanish without a trace. My phone, now a weapon in this quiet war, buzzed with the first decline transaction at 12:03 p.m. Elaine was sitting down for her weekly lunch with her socialite friends at the Riverside Country Club. I imagined her face, the perfect smile crumbling as the waitress delivered the news. The distress in her voice when she called at 12:50 p.m. was genuine, not because her conspiracy was threatened, but because her social status had been publicly compromised. "Richard, something's wrong with our accounts. My card was declined, and the bank says there's a security hold. It's embarrassing," she cried, her perfect facade cracking. Her voice held no mention of the joint account with Mark, no acknowledgement of the missing $50,000 she had funneled away. I played my part perfectly, feigning concern. "Security hold? That sounds serious. I'll call Tom Bradley immediately." But I didn't. Instead, I drove to a quiet construction site, the familiar sounds of machinery feeling more grounding than ever before. The texts throughout the afternoon became increasingly desperate. "Still can't access any accounts. This is ridiculous. Even our emergency credit line is frozen. How am I supposed to buy groceries? Each message was a small victory, a grim satisfaction. For 25 years, Elaine had taken financial security for granted, while I worked 60-hour weeks to provide it. Now, she was experiencing what it felt like when that security vanished. Mark's reaction, however, was even more telling. My private investigator, Mike Rodriguez, called with an update. Mark tried to access his shared account with Elaine 3 times this afternoon. When that failed, he attempted to withdraw funds from your daughter Olivia's education fund that he manages. That fund was also frozen, per my instructions. Mark's demeanor had shifted from confident lawyer to angry, desperate man, making threats about legal action. His leverage had evaporated. By 6 p.m., I was back in my home office, reviewing the day's financial battlefield. Every shared account was frozen, every credit line suspended, every automatic payment system now required my personal authorization. Elaine's access to 25 years of accumulated wealth had been reduced to whatever cash she carried in her purse. The security measures were completely legal and justified, a husband protecting his assets from a pending legal review. But Margaret and Dan would understand the message perfectly. The man they'd planned to ambush was no longer playing defense. He was now on the offense. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m., Elaine's number. I knew the voice that answered would no longer be manipulative, but desperate. It was time to see how quickly conspirators turned on each other when their plans started crumbling. I would let them panic. I would let them make mistakes. The real war was just beginning. The game had officially moved from defense to offense, and Elaine and Mark, blinded by panic, were making the first crucial mistakes. My private investigator, Mike Rodriguez, observed as Elaine frantically rushed into Mark's downtown office. She had lost her composure, her voice loud enough to be overheard by a neighbor and Mike's contact in a nearby accounting firm. Richard knows something, and he's cutting off everything. I couldn't even buy gas for my car, she exclaimed, her panic palpable. Mark's professional facade quickly fell away, replaced by the sharp litigation voice of a cornered man. The timing isn't coincidental. He must have overheard something when we were discussing strategy. He was right, but he had no idea how much I had heard, or about the 43 minutes of audio I now possessed. Instead of retreating, they decided to escalate. We accelerate everything, Mark declared, his voice filled with a desperate ambition. Monday morning, I file for emergency divorce proceedings with immediate spousal support. We claim Richard is engaging in financial abuse by restricting your access to marital assets. Elaine's eyes lit up with predatory interest. Financial abuse? That sounds legally compelling. They began planning to weaponize 25 years of my generosity, twisting every act of love into a calculated form of control. Mark, in a breathtaking display of audacity, planned to reframe my providing for her as evidence that I created financial dependency to maintain control. My gifts, our comfortable lifestyle, everything, would be twisted into proof of a systematic isolation strategy. Their malicious plan also involved my daughter, Olivia. Mark believed her psychology training made her skeptical, which he saw as a perfect tool. Olivia's hesitation to support you immediately becomes evidence of how thoroughly Richard has manipulated family dynamics, he reasoned. He planned to position her professional skepticism as a result of my exploitation, an expert psychological opinion confirming my manipulative patterns. This was a new level of betrayal. They were not just trying to take my money. They were trying to turn my own daughter's professional integrity against me. While they were plotting their character assassination campaign, I was busy executing my own strategic counterattack. A call from my old friend Jim Morrison, now a police detective, gave me the leverage I needed. Dan Thompson's got problems brewing with the State Bar Association, Jim told me. 3 subcontractors had filed complaints against Mark for non-payment, a classic trust account violation. Mark was scrambling to find $23,000 to make them whole before an investigation was concluded. I immediately spent the next 3 hours making strategic calls to these angry contractors, gathering documented evidence of Mark's systematic pattern of using client funds for his personal debts. By 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, I was on the phone with the State Bar Association's ethical complaint hotline, filing a formal complaint against Mark. His professional reputation, the very foundation of his plot, was now under formal ethical review. By the time my investigator texted me that Mark had left his office in a panic, carrying 3 boxes of files, I knew exactly where he was going. Straight to Elaine to double down on their desperate gambit. The game was no longer about money. It was a battle for my reputation, my relationship with my daughter, and my very identity. They thought they had unleashed a monster. They were right, but the monster wasn't me. It was the consequences of their own actions. The Davenport County Courthouse felt different on May 1st. To me, it represented the culmination of 35 years of honest work, a tangible representation of the integrity I had built my life upon. For Elaine and Mark, I knew it represented a final, desperate gambit. Judge Patricia Hendricks, presiding over the Domestic Relations Court, had a no-nonsense efficiency born from seeing every form of family deception imaginable. Elaine sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, Linda Hawthorne, wearing the carefully chosen outfit of a victim, a conservative dress, minimal makeup, and a demeanor that was a mix of genuine nervousness and practiced vulnerability. "Mrs. Cole," Judge Hendricks began, reviewing the emergency restraining order petition, "you allege your husband has engaged in financial abuse and intimidation. Can you describe specific incidents that led you to fear for your safety?" Elaine's voice trembled slightly. "Your Honor, for months my husband has been restricting my access to our accounts, monitoring my spending, making threats about what would happen if I tried to leave." She paused for effect, then continued with increasing confidence. "Last week, he completely cut off my access to money, even for basic necessities. He threatened to use his business connections to destroy my reputation. I watched her, my wife of 25 years, perjure herself with every word. Each lie built upon the previous one, creating a fictional narrative of abuse from a man who had spent decades providing her every comfort. Her performance was a masterpiece of calculated deception, designed to paint me as a controlling monster." The judge then turned to my attorney. "Does the defendant wish to respond?" James Morrison, my lawyer, stood with calm authority. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Cole's claims are not only false, but part of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud the defendant of marital assets." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Elaine's face went white. Linda Hawthorne whispered frantically in her client's ear, but it was too late. The damage was done. "We have an audio recording of Mrs. Cole and her co-conspirator, Daniel Thompson, planning this exact scenario 6 weeks ago," James continued, his voice steady and unwavering. He then connected his phone to the courtroom's audio system. The sound of Elaine's voice filled the chamber, loud and clear. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." For 43 minutes, the judge and everyone in that courtroom listened to the complete conspiracy unfold. They heard Elaine's cruel mockery of our marriage, Mark's detailed legal strategies for asset seizure, and their calculated plan to use our daughter, Olivia, as a pawn. "The man actually believes I love him," Elaine's recorded voice declared with casual cruelty. Her fabricated victim narrative crumbled in real time, exposed as a hollow performance built on lies. Her claims of fearing for her safety became absurd when contrasted with her recorded laughter about manipulating me. Judge Hendricks stopped the recording and fixed Elaine with a stare reserved for perjurers. "Mrs. Cole, do you have any response to this evidence?" Elaine's mouth opened and closed silently, her carefully constructed mask of a victim completely shattered. Linda Hawthorne, realizing she had been used to file fraudulent court documents, immediately requested to withdraw from the case. The judge granted the motion and delivered her final verdict. "Mrs. Cole, I'm dismissing your restraining order petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible perjury charges." The gavel fell with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. They thought they were playing a high-stakes game, but they had just learned that I was always a few steps ahead. The gavel's finality echoed through the courtroom, a sound that felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. The divorce settlement, finalized 2 weeks later, was a testament to Elaine's spectacular miscalculation. Her documented deception completely eliminated any claim to my assets, and the prenuptial agreement she had signed eagerly years ago limited her to a minimal asset division. Mark's law license suspension became a permanent revocation when the State Bar Association discovered over $100,000 in missing client funds and a pattern of professional misconduct. Last I heard, he had moved to Nebraska and was working as a paralegal, a fitting end for a man with champagne tastes and a beer budget. Olivia, my daughter, filed for divorce the day after the hearing. She cited irreconcilable differences, and her professional integrity remained intact. She later started a new practice focused on family therapy, with a particular expertise in recognizing manipulation patterns. She was a testament to the fact that integrity, once shaken, could be rebuilt with honesty and courage. Her life, unlike her mother's, was not defined by the past, but by a future she was building on a foundation of truth. 6 months later, Elaine was working retail at the same mall where she had once spent my money on luxury items. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The country club she had cherished had revoked her membership, and the social circle she had so meticulously curated had dissolved with whispered efficiency. Her frantic Sunday night calls to Mark, full of desperation and mutual recrimination, had become the soundtrack of her new reality. Her downfall wasn't my doing. It was the inevitable result of her own choices. She had thrown away her family when she decided I was nothing more than a barrier to her inheritance. The house feels different now. It is quieter, but also more honest. No more fake conversations, no more calculated affection. Just the sound of rain on the windows I built with my own hands, in a home that is finally mine again. I've rebuilt my company's reputation, stronger than before, with new contracts and deeper business relationships. The community's support during my family difficulties had translated into renewed trust in my work. The most meaningful part of all was rebuilding my relationship with Olivia. She calls just to talk, just to ask about my day, not to ask for money or favors. She had learned a valuable lesson about the difference between love and performance. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Dad, I'm 6 months into counseling and learning so much about healthy relationships. I'd love to have coffee sometime, just the two of us. I want to earn your trust back, one conversation at a time." I smiled. My heart, once cold and analytical, felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. I had given my daughter the space to find her own truth, and she had shown the courage to choose it. My life, once a game of strategy, was now one of peace and purpose. Margaret had been right about one thing: I really had believed she loved me. But now, I finally knew the difference between love and performance, and the peace I found in that knowledge was worth every sacrifice.